Is Merle coming to say a few words to you? Thank you.
Well, a few words it started off to be, and it won't be long, but I just wanted some understanding of why I was so thrilled at having this. And it wasn't a party for me at all. It was, I'm not sort of being up there. I just wanted it to be something that would glorify the Lord and that we could see in, you know, what he's done for me over the years and my family, that it's only because I love him that I'm here today, and it's only because he's so loving to us that he's helped me to be here today. So I'll just start at the beginning for a few minutes. I was born in 1942 on obviously the 11th of October, and I was one of twins, but my baby brother, I was the fourth in the family of four girls, and my baby brother died at birth. So I was in a terrible state from what I was told, medically speaking. And 3 times my mother continued to tell me as I was growing up. 3 times I died, and they'd come and told her they couldn't do any more for me in those first days of life. But my mother had a sister that was a Christian older than her, Auntie Gladys. She never had children, and she was the oldest in the family, I think, a family of about 11. Now, Auntie Gladys moved out of town down, I've forgotten where she went to, it's quite away from here. And I remember on my 11th birthday, 12th birthday, she bought me this Bible with all coloured pages in. And you know, it was the most beautiful thing. Even at that age, I was in a Church of England school down the road here at I was going to say St Thomas's, that's Stockton Heath, at the St James's, yes. And I was here from being, well, I didn't start school properly because of my health until I was about 5 or 6. And I didn't get into full-time school till I was about 7 because I had so much time off with bad health. And so what I picked up at St James's Church there, it just lifted me even as a young child. I can remember the songs that we sung. Nothing that we sing here in the prayer time, though. I can never keep up with those. So I loved worship, I loved singing. And it went on. I was sort of half-time in school till I was about 8 or 9. And what was happening with me, I was very anemic for one thing, and I kept passing out. So at that age, and neighbours used to pick me up and carry me inside because I wasn't much of a weight then. And I never thought about God and the Lord. I just loved the stories I heard in the school. So when it came to my first marriage, when I was about 20 at the time, and we had our first child and that. It was the beginning of something that I'm just so thankful for, really, because the Lord granted 3 daughters to myself and Vincent, that was my first husband. And he died when I was 32. And it was all that he'd started wanting to go to Australia, moving all the time and starting a new life that never really happened. But it wasn't his fault. And I got so homesick when he decided at one point, when I'd got Ruth, the youngest daughter. She's got a biblical name, but I wasn't a Christian at that time. But she's the only one in the family that had a biblical name. And that was really because my best friend down here in St Mary Street, where we lived at that time, was a lovely girl called Ruth. She died at a young age of cancer, I think when she was around 20 or early 20s. So as the children grew up, I just saw God's hand upon them. There was accidents happening that really, it was a miracle, only God's provision and God. And I used to even then pray over them at night time when they went to bed, and when I felt there was anything wrong, I always used to give them to the Lord and ask him to watch over them. There was car accidents as they started driving that honestly you would wonder how on earth they came alive through it. With Ruth, when she was having her first baby, she was in a terrific accident, and they were really worried about the pregnancy. It was nearly coming to full term. So he was born a little premature, but it was just amazing how he survived that, and she did at such a traumatic age, just as she was going into labour. So I could stand here and tell you one thing. Well, I'm sure you've all got similar testimonies, and I hope if anyone feels there's something that can be told and shown, that you will see what God is doing, because that is the theme, and what certainly I wanted to work at with this, that we come in to give the Lord thanks, not for my 80 years, but for the time. Even each of us have had a time, I'm sure, when we felt this is the end, or goodness, what's going to happen next? And he's there for us, isn't he? He's there whatever work or sadness we're going through. So when my first husband died when I was 32, I thought it was the end of the world. I loved him tremendously, and we were so pleased, the two of us, with the girls. They were just beginning to grow up. Ruth, the youngest, had her first birthday over in Australia. And even there, I knew we'd made a mistake when we were coming, and I think going over there, sold the house, but we hadn't sold the shop that we we owned on Wilderspool Causeway, where we lived. So it held us up quite a bit, but we got there in the finish. And I was just so homesick. It was everything that wasn't going right as well in the new beginnings as they should have been. And even then, I didn't know the Lord, but I just kept praying. When we came home, the Lord was there again after a really bad accident when me and the children were in the car. And I'd not been driving that long. But the Lord once again protected us and sheltered us, and we got out of the car. And it was shortly after that Vince took bad, and he died very suddenly when I was 32, and I was left with the 3 girls. I didn't know what was coming next. I just didn't want to go on, but I had the girls, and that gave me the real desire to, get some life, and to get the children going through school and that. So when it came to it, Vincent had this well, he always called him his brother, really, a neighbour's son. He was an only child, but Tom was one of 2. He had an older sister and lived just a few yards from where Vincent did. So they grew up as brothers, 2 brothers. He went on holiday with the other family regularly, and when they got into teens and that, he was in a Catholic school, Vince, and never had anything to want to do, really, or even talk about God and that. But not being a Christian, I wasn't trying to convert him at that point in time. But when his death came, it was a real shock to Tom, because they'd been such good pals and, grown up together. And we hadn't seen him in the house, at our house, for quite a while. And he said later on, when he opened up about that, Tom, he said, I didn't come to the house because every time I came, he picked his coat up, Tom, and he said, Vincent, and said, let's go for a drink, because the Causeway Hotel was just round the corner from where we lived. And so he said, I stopped coming because it wasn't right. So that was that at that point. But when he suddenly died, and I had to ring him up and tell him, you know, what had happened to Vincent, he said he couldn't believe it. He came to the house the next morning and he was in tears and sobbing and crying. He said, how did it happen? I said, well, you know, Vince, I said, it's what was expected, really, in a lot of ways. So I said, but he always said he wouldn't live long and he wouldn't get into old age. I said, so in some ways it wasn't, although it wasn't expected at that age. He was 12 years older than me, so he would have been 32, 44 at the time when he died. So that was it, and Tom came down and he started looking after me and the children, taking me shopping, taking the girls out and me. And I'd started to go at that time into Stockton Heath Church. We'd bought a house up there because Vincent thought it was a nice area to be. And we came off Wilderspool Causeway into a house there. There's about 3 or 4 things I could tell you that happened that showed the Lord's hand on the way my life was forming at that time. And I won't go into it now, but one was a house that he looked at and wanted in Priory Street, just a bit further down towards Bridgefoot. And we said we'd have the house. And then the day after, my sister took me to see this other house on London Road in Stockton Heath. And as soon as I walked in, you know, when you get that feeling, this is for us, this is meant for us, I just sense it. And I went home and I asked him, would he come and view it? He said, no, he said, we've said that we'd accept that house in Priory Street. There's no reason why we shouldn't. So I just, you know, we used to give in all the time at those days. I'm not quite the forceful one that I can be at this point in my life, but nothing was ever argued about, but I just went his way constantly. So the following day, I said to him, would you come and see that house on London Road? And he said, no, I don't want to. And would you believe it? 2 days after this had happened, the people that were selling the house in Priory Street, the husband came knocking on my front door. And when I said, let him in, and I called to Vince to come and talk to him, he came with his wife, and she was in tears. And she said, we've just come to tell you, we've taken it off the market, the house. They said the fish and chip shop that we wanted to buy has fallen through, and so we've no business now that we were going to take on. So he said, I'm really sorry about all this, and you must be upset. I said, oh, don't worry about us. You know, I'm there thinking, oh, thank you, even though I didn't talk to God at that time. Thank you, God. You know, I knew it must have been him. So, fair enough, we went and he viewed the other house and he liked it very much. So, it went on with the sales agents. And this is the shock that convinced me, not at that moment in time, but sometime after when I was reviewing what God had done in my life, that within a week or so of them saying they didn't want it and it was coming off the market, it was about a week or 10 days, they turned up at the front door again, husband and wife. And they said, oh, we've just come to tell you, we've got a buyer for the house, the shop now. So they said, our house is on the market. Are you going to go ahead with it? And I said straight away, I said, oh no, I said, we've seen another one now, I'm sorry, what we're going after. And you know, it took me 15 years About 5 years or so after that, after I'd become a Christian, when I realised how miraculous that was in a way. You know, Vince wanted this house, I didn't, and when I saw London Road, I was all out for that, I really was. And it was a lovely house, very roomy. It wanted a lot doing at it, but that was nothing. So that was just one occasion where the Lord really organised something that sent me on a different path. And it was living in that house on Stockton Heath, where just around the corner was the Sunday school, as we called it in those days, of Stockton Heath Independent Methodist Church. So the girls started asking, could they go, because the friends were going. And I said, of course, yeah. I thought, oh, that's a good mum. You know, send them to church, you know, give them some teaching in the life. So I could go on up and down with everything, but I'm not going to. What I wanted to do was to just give the glory to God. It was some years after that when I'd started attending Stockton Heath Church, when I became a believer, and it was through Anne and the hours she spent with me through my time of widowhood and not knowing what to do. And she spent a lot of time with me. So going to that church, I grew more and more in the faith. And later, this was God's hand as well, because they announced in the church one Sunday, I was doing, what do you call it, Bible readings and that through the post from one of the big firms that were doing it in those days and sending out material and that. And then I'd come to an end in it. And this Sunday morning, John Dolan was giving the notices out, and he said, oh, we've got one notice here asking if there's anyone interested in starting the minister's course. It's also, he said, a course of teaching for those that just want the teaching. So I took it. It was one of these by post again that they fill all the papers in for you, and you sort of put the answers and things and then send it back. So I went to see John after the morning service, and I told him I felt led to do this course. So he said, well, will you come and talk to me after lunch? And I said, yes. So I went round to his house and we talked. He said, do you realise what is required in this? I said, oh, yes, I've been doing it with this Christian firm, I've forgotten, thinking it was just a postal thing and that. And he said, oh, no, he said, it's more than that. He said, it's about training to become a minister, or just training yourself and educating yourself through the Bible and things. He said, so do you want to put your name down for it? I said, oh, can I go home and talk to Tom about it first? Because we got married by this time, and we'd got Christopher, who was only 4, I think, at this particular time. So I prayed about it, and I prayed about it, and I had this peace. But it was just to do it for information, and no thought came into my head about being a minister. So that went on for 4 years, and at the end of the 4 years, John asked me, would I stand to apply as a minister? And I said, well, what do you think? He said, I just feel that God's hand's upon you. He said, and I don't know what he has for you, but he said, I think it would be good to go, to the end of the studies and then see what you think and what Tom thinks. So I thought, oh, Tom's not going to be happy with this. I was going to go out. He wasn't a Christian for a long time after this. But when I came to tell him, I thought, oh, I'm out a lot at the minute. I was doing a lot of ladies' meetings at that time, speaking and things like that. So when I asked him, I thought, if he says no and he doesn't want me to be out anymore, that's it. I'll take it. It's not for me. So we talked about it. And when I told him what I was thinking and what I hoped to do. He said, well, what difference is it going to make? You're doing all that now, aren't you? So I'd never thought about it like that, because I was always out, and I was always at meetings, both, teaching and learning meetings, and going out speaking at that time. So I came home and I just cried. I thought, I don't know what I'm doing here. I don't know what I'm letting myself for, but I just believe God's leading me on that route. So I went in for it, did the 4 years. It should have been, was it 3 years then or 4? 4, but we extended it another year because there was a group of us doing it, and one of the men had missed one of the years and hadn't done the full course. So John had asked would the group of us carry on with it and do this other year, which we did. And the more I look back over these things, I mean, to me, I think many of us can do it if we sit and take stock and say, what has God done in my life? What's he done in your life? Tom and I had such a wonderful marriage. He was a lovely husband. I thought, it used to say at one time, when the marriage was made in heaven, I said I always used to wonder what that meant. I said, but I think you're right on that one, Tom. And he came to church with me for years, to the services, and when I went out preaching, he used to come and take me, even though I could drive then. So I just didn't know what to make of all of this, but God did, and he took me through it. And when Tom died so suddenly, it wasn't that sudden, because he'd been in hospital 3 weeks in Warrington and 3 weeks at Liverpool Royal. And they'd warned me right at the end, the day, so 24 hours before he died, there was nothing they could do with it. The cancer had gone right through his body, and he came home, which he wanted to do. And that day, all the family, grandchildren and that, all came to see him, going in the room 2 at a time. We had a hospital bed brought down, and the whole of the family that Sunday afternoon came and sort of had the last hour with him or so, and that went on all the Sunday. It came to the Sunday night. I'll just fit this last bit in because it really mesmerised me. Tom used to talk. He was never into, listening to people. I'm trying to think. When they do... What, sorry? Cursing. Yes, yeah. So he was never into anything like that. And he told me a few times, he said, Merle, he said, the number 8, I was told John Dolan this, and he was amazed, actually. He said, it's been very important in my life. He said, I started in the army on the 8th of this month, month he mentioned. He said, I went into he was working most of his time, first of all, in the postal side of the Royal Mail. And then he went on to the engineering side. He said, when they took me on the engineering, he said, that was the 8th. And I said, he said, my birthday's on the 8th, which it was the 8th of August. And I said, have we got married on the 8th of January? He said, yes, this is what I mean. He said, it was all good things that was happening to me. He said, but there's somebody unseen that was bringing all this together. So I didn't go into it then. When he came out of that hospital and came home, it was the bank holiday weekend in May, and he came home on the Sunday. We went up. they said they weren't going to release him, this big tall Egyptian fella that had been looking after him. He said, he said, Mrs. Atterley, he's not going to survive the trip home to Warrington. He said he is so weak and frail now. He said any moment he could go. Chris had come with me, and this chap was saying, I'm not discharging him, so there won't be an ambulance to come home with him. So our Chris said to him, it's all right, we'll just hire one. He said, my dad's coming home. And Chris was in his 20s probably at that point, later 20s. So he came home. The family had all seen him that afternoon. And I never thought anything about this figure 8. But it did pass through my head. This was about the 3rd of May, I think it was. And I thought, does that mean we've only got till the 8th of May? You know, is the Lord going to take him then? So it got to the night time and we could see he was going worse. We were waiting for the nursing staff to come out and see him at home. And before that had happened, he took bad. And I was sat on the bed talking to him. All the family had gone other than Carol. And she was stood there, half in the hall and half in the room he was in at the front. So all of a sudden, I could see he was going, and I leaned over him and I was saying all these lovely things that I could to him. It sounds ridiculous at this time, but I wanted him to know things. And he just groaned once, went back on the pillow, and that rasp that you know that this is it, that had happened with my first husband, went, and he just lay back on the pillow with his eyes still open, just looking at me. So this was in our house now, where we are now, where I am. So it all settled down and we got the undertakers to come out. I said I didn't want him taking that night. There's no rush for him to leave his home. I said, can you come tomorrow and collect him? So they said yes. But the next day when I got up, Carol had slept at the house and Eater had come as well to stay with me. And I said to Carol, you know the clock in the hall, it was Tom's clock with a Westminster chime. A lot of people that stayed with us said they couldn't stand it in the night chiming, but you could switch it off. So I said, you know, Carol, I said, what time was it when the clock was chiming? And I think probably most of you have put it together now. I said, can you tell me the exact time? And Carol said, yes, Mum. She said it was 8 o'clock. So, you know, I could cry now just thinking about it, but the Lord picked me up, and it was a long while before I came out of that and started mixing with people again. I was coming to church and that was it. So it really knocked me for 6. But the thing was that I found out at that point that Tom had already given his life just a few weeks before to the Lord, and he would have been with him in heaven. I know that, and I know I will see him again. So this is just a little part of the life I've seen God's hand working in, and I just trust, you know, as we're here tonight, if anyone's got a short, not as long as me, please, testimony, and you want to say something to the glory of God, then I don't think it will be a problem to come up and to say it for a few minutes. So thank you for listening to me. I've just grown in strength and I've been up and down in my life, many occasions, but God has always done the lifting up. The Lord has been there with me, and that's all that it means to me. Everything in my life has been good because of him. Okay, thank you.